What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Geekiverse Reviews. We are talking some Final Fantasy today for Final Fantasy VII Remake. I'm Josiah Leroy. With me today, Rashawn Anderson. Rashawn, what's up, my friend?
What's going on? I've been waiting for this for a long time.
You beat the game weeks ago. Just kidding.
I know, right? I've just been sitting here, twiddling my thumbs.
Hey, it's all good. We're all caught up now. Also with us today, Tim Talbot. Tim, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here. And I'm not a platinum king like Rashawn, but
yeah. See, Rashawn, it's catching on.
It's catching on. Okay, fair enough.
So
I like it.
Me too. It's great. Usually the nicknames that we throw out don't stick, but I think this one will. So it's good.
I like it.
Awesome. Tim, I'm working on one for you. Don't worry.
Okay, wait.
Again, we're talking Final Fantasy VII here on the Geekiverse YouTube channel, as well as the podcast network, wherever you download podcasts. So we're going to go through just a few facets of the game, give our overall impressions, and then put our stamp of approval on the game. That's a spoiler in itself. Regarding spoilers, we are going to wait until the end of the episode to discuss this, and we will give you fair warning. So if that is something that you are leery of and are worried about, don't worry. Take a seat. We will take those as we come towards the end and give you a fair warning. But we finally got the game. We finally got Final Fantasy VII Remake. We had a long history, I felt like, of waiting for this game in development. And, of course, it's been some time since the original came out. So maybe, Tim, I don't know if you want to jump in first here, but you want to just briefly touch on kind of the story of the game's development, just how long it felt like we waited for this game.
Yeah, so myself, I think, man, when it first was announced, if I actually go back on my Instagram, I actually posted on my Instagram as a post saying how excited I was for the remake, and that was, 5 years ago almost?
E3 2015.
Crazy. And for me, growing up, this was the game of all games. I mean, when I was a kid, I named my characters in every game Cloud. I was obsessed. And, I was really excited for it. And it was one of those things where it felt like forever. And then they were going to make it and they weren't going to make it. And then they released that trailer of the very beginning where he's on the train in Midgar. And I was like, oh my God, it's happening. And then nothing for a long time. But it was in work for a while. But, I'm glad it finally came out. And I'm excited to talk about it. That's all I can really say. So,
Rashawn, give your impressions on that feeling as well. It felt like, again, you mentioned it, E3 2015, we waited for a while for this game, and even really longer than that official announcement.
Yeah, for me, it's like, so I grew up always I guess being a child, you don't really know what you want, but growing up, I knew I wanted some adaptation of Final Fantasy VII. The lore of that game really caught me just from the beginning. Like, I remember growing up watching Advent Children, which takes place post Final Fantasy VII. I remember playing the Crisis Core on PSP. That is still to this day one of the best Final Fantasy games ever made, in my opinion, and one of the best games that was on the PSP system. That was a prequel to Final Fantasy VII, so I loved how they had this prequel game. They had the main game of Final Fantasy VII. Then again, if you still want more, you can go ahead and watch the movie Advent Children afterwards. And then you still had Dirge of Cerberus in there too, which was another expansion of the Final Fantasy VII lore. So I dabbled. And the funny thing with me is that I became such a big Final Fantasy fan in general, but mainly when we're talking about the storyline of Final Fantasy, from all of the other stuff. I actually didn't play Final Fantasy VII, the original, not as a kid. I didn't play that till later on. So everything else gripped me. And then I eventually went back and played the actual game, the original game, which was a cool experience. Even playing it later, I still get, when you look at the time frame that it came out, why it was so big. But yeah, seeing that announcement at the time, man, like, I can't even, the goosebumps, just the feels, again, the music, seeing that old Reliable that you see right behind me, the Buster Sword, seeing that on Cloud's back, and again, a modern setting, and just the thought of what we were going to get, incredible.
And I don't know about Rashawn, but the way I felt, I was nervous. I was really, really nervous because in my head, that was such a good game. And there's been a lot of times where people remake games and it's just not good. And that was my biggest concern when they first released it is, are we going to have what we have right now, which is what they released, or are we going to have one that's kind of like they're putting their own spin on it and it doesn't really work? That was my biggest concern. And also you mentioned growing up playing Final Fantasy games. I've actually beaten every Final Fantasy. I've been obsessed. I didn't have internet growing up. I grew up in Attica. So when I played games, I'd actually drive to a local church to get Wi-Fi on my laptop. And I used to download emulators, stuff like that. And I actually downloaded all the old games and played them on my laptop. So I was obsessed, to say the least. And
that's an awesome, like, classic gamer backstory. Like, we all, I guess, gamers, we all have something similar to that with the franchise. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. But yeah, I think maybe we want to get right into the nitty gritty of it. I'm excited to talk about everything. So
yeah, so we fast forward to 2020 here. We get the long-awaited Final Fantasy VII Remake. Let's talk your first impressions, getting into the world, getting into the gameplay, all of the above. I'll start with Tim here. You download the game or you pop it in your system and play it. What is going through your mind?
Well, first question here, Sean, did you play the demo?
I did.
Okay, I played the demo too. I needed to, but I wish I didn't, because the demo was essentially the beginning of the game.
Yeah.
But when I played the demo, goosebumps. I mean, it was just goosebumps. That's all I can say. It was like reliving my childhood all over again, and I loved it. Every second of it. He hops off the train with his Buster Sword on his back, and you're just like,
classic scene.
And when you first fight that first battle against the soldiers, it's just like, it just feels great. When you first start with the combat, it feels amazing. It feels like Crisis Core. That's kind of the biggest comparison I would have to it. Kind of a mix between like Crisis Core and Kingdom Hearts style combat. And it just feels really well. It feels smooth. It feels fluid. I love the way they incorporated the ATB gauge system, where you can essentially make it go. It's not pausing it, but it moves very, very slow, and give you that feel of the original, where you can pick and choose and strategize. Which, when you first turn on the game and you start playing, it's like, well, I can just hack and slash my way through this. Then you hit the first boss, and it's like, okay, well, maybe I can't hack my way through this. I actually have a buddy who bought it and died on the first boss, and he's like, okay, well, this isn't as easy as I thought it would be. But first impression wise, I was blown away. It's just everything that you have in your head that you want to see is right there in front of you. I'm sure. What did you think, Rashawn? Do you think it was similar, or how did you feel?
No, I agree. So first impressions, yeah, if we're talking that, come from the demo, really. That was so unexpected too. Part of me leading up to that demo didn't think that they were going to do that, just based on Square Enix's track record with releasing demos for bigger titles like a Kingdom Hearts 3. They didn't do that for example. But just booting up that demo, and again, it's this. All these feelings still translate to release day. The feel of the game was something. I was from everything that I saw, I was expecting it to be fluid, but it's a different feeling when, again, like Tim was talking about, when you have the classic scene of the train, clouds on it, all the Avalanche soldiers get off, and Barrett says, "Come on, Merc," and then he jumps off the train, and then you have that first battle with those Shinra soldiers, and just going through the introductory parts of that stage, the combat. For me, I draw comparisons to. A lot of people have drawn comparisons to Final Fantasy 15, and I would draw those comparisons too. It's definitely different though. Like Final Fantasy 15, like, you don't have as many weapons to work with at one time. Like, Cloud and Noctis are obviously two different characters in that regard. This is definitely a lot more ATB centric and more thought provoking, I think, than Final Fantasy 15. Like Final Fantasy 15, I'm able to go into a fight and pretty much just kind of spam my way into, in and out of it if I really want to. Like there wasn't much thought to the combat in that game, in my opinion. And that was a game I did everything in that game. That was a game I platinumed as well. So that was a game I was able to just go in. And there were some fights in that game where it's like, okay, maybe I have to think my way through this, but for the most part, not really. I feel like Final Fantasy VII Remake here, does a good job. It makes you think about every single encounter. Besides those introductory Shinra soldier fights, where you really doesn't really take much thinking, only because obviously, again, it's the first 10 minutes of the game. They don't want to hit you over the head with it yet. But yeah, like Tim was talking about the ATB gauge, that was awesome. I remember when they first talked about bringing that in, I wasn't necessarily skeptical, but I'm just like, okay, like it's interesting seeing a modern RPG still going, action RPG still going for that kind of style. But it's definitely a beautiful mix of just real time action RPG mixed with that strategic element of the ATB gauge. And then the first boss. The first boss is something that I've actually seen a couple of people die on that, because I think it catches you off guard because it wants you to really get used to the free flowing version of the combat leading up to that first boss. And then that first boss is that true first, okay, like I can still do the free flow, press square to do a light attack. You can go into Punisher mode for your heavier attacks if you want to, and still free flow that way. But it does force you to at least begin to learn the combat engine of the game, where your first test of, even though you don't have much materia to work with, the materia is the magic of the game. Your first test of being able to really effectively use that, I feel like, in a large boss setting. There's an enemy little mini boss before that where you could test it out, but that boss really tests your skills there. So yeah, and like Tim was talking about before, the goosebumps, man, the goosebumps of realizing, the first thing I thought was, man, I'm going to play an entire game with this combat engine. And then besides the combat, just the looks and again, seeing Barrett and Cloud in that first mission just in 2020 and not 1997. And again, someone like me who grew up watching Advent Children, seeing these characters in, a CGI setting like that. And I play this game, I'm like, that is insane how the character models in just the regular game almost look as good as an entire movie that they did. That was one of the first things I thought of, was like, I'm going to play an entire game of this. It's crazy.
Yeah, I agree with you. The whole game looked like a cutscene. It was...
Yeah, the whole game was a cutscene. Yes.
Yeah, I was streaming on Discord with my buddies. They wanted to see what it was like, and like, oh, are you moving your character? That's how good it looked. Mm-hmm. And it just, like you said, everything looked super, super clean. It looked super nice.
That's a big testament, honestly. And obviously graphics just, they naturally improve with time, but that they didn't really, hold back on budgeting when it came to, hey, we're going to really make sure this production value is through the roof. That says a lot. I think back to games like God of War that came out in 2018, or even Uncharted 4 just a few years prior to that, and how I think more so with Uncharted, I felt like so many times I didn't realize I was controlling my character because I didn't realize a cutscene was over. And that was maybe the start of the time frame in video games where transitions just happen so beautifully without knowing a cutscene was over. So to hear that, and it's such a big, kind of vast game like this, again, that's really saying a lot.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Just overall opinions on combat, like how everything went as far as the game, meat itself. One thing I loved is the fact that it's such a minor thing, but the fact that you could see the materia on the back of the weapons was
the
cool.
Specific ones too, the specific colors, depending on what you choose. Yeah.
And stuff like that, which I loved. And it's just the little things. They put a lot of effort and work into the little things that matter to me as a fanboy, essentially, if you want to call it that. And, as far as the style of the game went, the RPG, it was, I don't know about you, Sean, it was much longer than I thought it would be. I remember playing the original, and you're out of Midgar, 10, 11 hours. I don't think it was really, you were there for that long.
That's the magic of the game, is that, and I recently on purpose too went back and played Final Fantasy VII, not fully through, purposely. I wanted to just play the Midgar section. I did it before the game came out. I think I got through it in 6 hours. Right. I think you can do it in 5 to 7. Yep. So they took a 5 to 7 hour segment, which is obviously the first segment of the original Final Fantasy, and they turn it into, if you just do the story, maybe 28 to 30 hours. If you do story plus side content, maybe like 35 to 40 hours. That's crazy.
Yeah, it was something else how much they added. And I think what they added, it didn't feel like it shouldn't have belonged. It felt like it should have been there the whole time. A lot of the side stories, like you got to learn more on Jesse, who was a main character throughout the game. You got to learn a lot about Jesse, and I was happy you got to ride the motorcycle before the end of the game, because that was one of my favorite things in the original. There's a part where you get to ride the motorcycle, and it's a different style of combat, but you get to do it multiple times throughout the game, which, I love that they did that. And just overall, how they built upon it, they had side quests throughout the game. And the side quests even felt like they should belong. It gave you more of a feedback on how the game went, and it actually had an effect on things later throughout the game. Which, again, I'm a big fan of. You put work into something, and putting the time into it, seeing what pays off. Because I know I've talked about this a few times with Joe. Is I'm a completionist in a sense. I'm not the platinum king. I don't do platinum. But if I play a game where it's like I want to collect every materia, or I want to collect, in a sense, more from my own gratification than anything else. If I play a platformer, I got to get 100%. I just have to do it. It's just, I want to see it at 100% on the screen. And
it's some in your brain that they do.
Castlevania Symphony of the Night. I got 100%, but I didn't complete a bestiary, so I didn't get the full platinum, and it didn't matter to me. I got the 100%. I'm happy. And, a little bit different than a lot of other people, but the game itself had a lot of collectibles, a lot of rewards for doing some of the side quests, things like that. And, it's just very well done, in my opinion. I think I mentioned this to you guys before. I think it's probably my game of the year, and it's probably not going to be close. It might be the best game, in my opinion, on the PS4 since it was released.
Wow.
Sean feels about that, but that's how I feel. That's how much I loved it. I haven't played again, I'm a dad. I don't have a ton of time. We wanted to do this review 2-3 weeks ago because Rashawn finished it in 2 days? You didn't sleep?
Something like that.
It's tough for me because I when I play, it's at night, and I've been playing other games too, and it's tough to juggle all my time. And it's probably one of the longest games I've played in a long time. So.
Well,
what were your thoughts on the overall game? Similar to mine, or what were you?
Yeah. Just to piggyback off of everything you said, to the point about how we get more information on side characters that originally maybe had, if you totaled up the time of dialogue they had, maybe they added up to 2 minutes of dialogue in the original, like Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge. You get so much extra stuff with them, which is cool. And of course, primarily Jesse, which is awesome. When you think about other characters, bigger characters that play a role into this as well, I love that you get introduced to Sephiroth a lot earlier in the game as well. Without getting too much into that, that's awesome that they brought him in early. And I think because they know the majority of, and this is the magic of the Final Fantasy VII lore that's always gripped me, is that it truly did bring Final Fantasy into the mainstream. There are not many gamers that I can think of, hardcore gamers, even casuals. Everyone knows who Sephiroth and Cloud are. Like, those two are such gaming icons at this point in their own way, definitely in the JRPG genre. So I love that they went for that creative design choice. It's like, you know what? And we understand that we want to make this a remake, but let's introduce the main villain who's so popular and that people really want to see him updated in 2020. Let's throw him in earlier, and let's throw him in a couple scenes and see where that goes. And I feel like it was all fluid with the story that they were going for. I don't feel like anything they added, whether it's anything with Sephiroth, anything with any of the other side characters that we got to know in this game, I didn't feel like anything in that way was forced. And of course, the main four in this game that we're looking at are Cloud, Tifa, Aerith, and Barrett. Just getting more development for them as well. Again, getting just so much more time to spend with these characters. Even this is something that every modern game has. But again, even the banter when you're just going through a world between the characters, every game has that. But again, we're talking about a game that's a remake of a game from 1997 where you strictly just got the text boxes and you moved on and that was it. And having everything voice acted and all that stuff was cool as well. And for me, since I did go back and try to do as much as I can, and I did get the platinum, hard mode, I want to touch on that just a little bit since we're talking about gameplay. That truly makes you appreciate the combat of the game. I personally, I was a little intimidated going into it because the main thing that I heard was you can't use items. So Tim, you probably immediately freak out. I was like, what do you mean I can't use items? I relied on items so much and playing through it normally. But no, you cannot use items whatsoever. The only way you can restore HP is by resting at the benches like normal. But on normal, you could restore your HP and MP from the benches. On hard mode, you can only restore your HP. So you have to go through the entire chapter with whatever MP you have. You'll still regenerate MP from, knocking down crates or whatever, but you have to be very resourceful and extremely careful. And it is kind of frustrating from time to time, but it truly does make you appreciate every single enemy in the game that you go up against. There is a respect there, and B, it just really shows. And I felt this way on normal mode, but especially on hard mode, is that you really have to take your time with these encounters. You can't necessarily rush into every single encounter, mashing square like you probably would in a Kingdom Hearts game or something like that, or even in a lot of cases in Final Fantasy 15, and expect to succeed. You really do have to, make sure your materia is spread out the way it needs to be. Make sure whatever materia that you are using, make sure it's upgraded as much as it can be. What combinations are you going for? All of these things play a factor. The levels that you got from your weapons carry over. All of that stuff carries over from your previous save, and then you can still obviously expand upon that and level up until the cap, just naturally by playing the game. So that's a little gem that I got to it that I got to experience playing it on hard mode. Just really seeing the true mechanics and how in depth they really are. That's definitely a huge call out to Square Enix. Whoever worked on I know who worked on the combat of this game. It's the team who originally developed the combat for Kingdom Hearts 2. And for my JRPG fans that are watching this, Kingdom Hearts 2 is renowned as one of the best combat engines ever in a JRPG or action RPG, however you want to classify that. So that team, they all these years later got brought, and obviously they probably added people, of course, but got brought to do this game. So I was expecting, and that goes back to my original point. I did expect the combat of this game to be amazing because of that detail. But it's so different. It's for me in a different way. I know some people are drawing comparisons to Kingdom Hearts, but the main thing is that ATB gauge and the materia that is different from just, kind of more of a hack and slash style with Kingdom Hearts. So huge kudos to this team. They really know this combat engine rivals like anything modern, especially like The Witcher. I know is a big one that people love. It rivals a game like that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and so for me, a big thing when I play games like this is typically I only want to play one character. I don't know how you guys are, but if I'm playing Final Fantasy VII as Cloud, for the most part, I'd want to play Cloud. And in this game was one of the few games where I wanted to play the other characters. There was rewards for it. So as you equip the weapons throughout the game, each weapon had a special ability. And if you use that weapon long enough with your own person, you had to play the character, you could learn the ability, or you had to use the ability for them. And it really encouraged me to experiment with some of the other characters. So then throughout the game, I slowly started using everyone else, and you started to get fluid switching between each character and who's getting the aggro from the enemies and stuff like that. And I thought that was really well done. Big thing in this game, too, that we didn't mention is the whispers. We won't talk about what they do or what they symbol, but that was one thing this game added that wasn't in the original. And you encounter them pretty early on, and they keep coming up throughout the game. And towards the end, they kind of really hit the climax, and you say, hey, this is what these are for, and this is what they resemble. And it created like a climax where that was what you were doing at the end, opposed to in the original, it was much different. So they kind of twisted up the ending. But we'll talk about that in the spoiler section. One big thing they changed a little bit. So,
and yeah, since you bring up just bits of the story, just for those who haven't played Final Fantasy VII, just to kind of give you an overview of the story that you'd be getting into if you decide to get this game. Basically, the premise is Cloud, the main character, is a mercenary, and he ends up taking a job from a resistance group called Avalanche. So the resistance that they're what they're trying to fight is the evil Shinra Corporation. Basically, best way to describe them is that they're basically to fund all of their research and all of the technology they build and how advanced that this company is and what they're trying to spread to the common people of Midgar. It is unfortunately taking up the resources of the planet. So by trying to make a utopia, if you will, they are sucking out the energy of the planet. Thus, that's where Barrett and Avalanche comes in. Barrett's the leader of this specific division of Avalanche that has Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse in it that Cloud takes that job from. So that's how the game starts off. And then just seeing how that basic premise and seeing that how that changes Cloud as a character. For those who have seen Cloud in other media, I'm pretty sure people know Cloud is very... he's very blunt and to the point. You know, he's not an eccentric personality. He's very, calm, cool, and collected, if you will, and kind of a jerk, at least to start. So seeing how his character changes from, listen, man, I just want the money. Like, that's all I really care about, to him getting brought into this story of, hey, like, we're trying to do something to better the planet. We're trying to do something that is bigger than each and every one of us. And seeing how a character like, oh, go ahead.
For a price.
Yes. Yes. And just seeing how that changes Cloud's character from start to finish, and seeing what that does to the rest of the characters too. So that's kind of just the basic premise of the story. Just from the get-go. So if you like something like that, and that basic premise has been in other games and even movies, again, big corporate company taking resources from the planet, someone's got to stop them, right? That basic premise has been in a lot of different entertainment forms. But seeing, again, a Final Fantasy game adopt that, and this is one of the major, I believe, first Final Fantasies that took it out of a traditional, like, classic, like, king and queen princess type of atmosphere and brought it to a more realistic setting. Final Fantasies 1 through 6, I may be missing one, maybe that took it in a little different direction, but the main thing of Final Fantasy was, again, that type of again, castles and kings and queens and servants, like that whole vibe, and seeing Final Fantasy bring that to a modern day, or at least at that time, modern day, and even still to this day, a modern day type of setting, and seeing what Square did with that, all of that stuff still transfers over to this game, to where I know a lot of people with a lot of other mediums are like, man, nothing will ever beat the original. In my opinion, this beats the original in every way. Scope, scale, of the stuff that they added with the story, combat, obviously, graphics, the main thing that you're going to still get with the original is your nostalgia, right. But just the fundamental building blocks that you want from an improvement of a game are present in this remake.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you that the game's phenomenal. Different games, and opposed to Rashawn, I'm going to kind of go the opposite spectrum. Because the original has so much nostalgia, like you said, nothing will ever take that away from me. It's always going to be one of my favorite games of all time. This is up there with that. If I would have played this before I played the original Final Fantasy, I probably would feel different, but a little bit different. So there's one other topic that I wanted to cover. So Joe, when's the last time you played a Final Fantasy game?
Never.
Okay, so this is one topic we always talk about. So what we would like to do now is I would like to have me and Rashawn give our final verdict and tell Joe why he needs to play Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Okay,
hit me.
As being someone new to the genre, never playing a Final Fantasy VII before, or a Final Fantasy game in general, because, the biggest thing that they kind of were preaching when this came out is they were saying, hey, you know what? If you've never played a Final Fantasy game before, this is a good entry point. That was their big pitch. You don't have to be a Final Fantasy fan to play this. And I'm sure Rashawn would agree. That could not be more true. It is so much different than all the other games. A big misconception by a lot of people is that, for example, I have a buddy that I play League of Legends with. I play a lot of League of Legends. And he said, do I need to know the other characters from the previous games? Like, does it all continue on? Each Final Fantasy game, unless it's like a Dash 2 or a Part 2, is essentially its own storyline. So each Final Fantasy game throughout the series is its own little world. I think there's a couple that shared the same world or same universe, or however they pitched it when they did it.
Yeah, and it's a very loose thread, even so.
But for the most part, they're all completely separate. And Final Fantasy VII, like Rashawn said, it's got its own plotline, its own storyline. My verdict on it is, if you like action RPGs, and you like story, there's no reason why this wouldn't be in the top games that you want to play. I was talking to Tank Newton, who is part of the Busy Sticks with John Fick, and I was telling him, because he posted he was downloading the original Final Fantasy VII game, and I told him, I said, I really want you to play that, but play the remake first, because you're going to enjoy the remake a lot more without knowing any of the storylines, because there's a couple of things that happen throughout the game that, if I didn't know, would have hit me a lot harder, and they hit me hard knowing what was going to happen. I messaged Rashawn in Discord saying, I was getting emotional, but there's a lot of parts in there that I wish I didn't know what was happening, because I would have enjoyed it so much more. But yeah, so Joe, you need to play it, and I'm sure Rashawn will kind of agree with me. But now, what was your verdict on it, Rashawn? What your overall thoughts on it all? Oh, my only complaint, I'll say that before I turn it over. There's a character towards the end. His name's Red X. What is it? Red
13.
One of my favorite games in the original. When you meet him in the original at that spot, he becomes a playable character. I couldn't play him, and that devastated me, because I loved him to death. But I understand why they didn't let you play him, and they will let you in the part 2. But I was devastated, to say the least. So, Rashawn, what are your final thoughts on it?
So, Joe, the reason why you need to play Final Fantasy VII is because, well, mainly, do you like RPGs, right? Like, you play other ones. It's just Final Fantasy you've just neglected for all this time.
Exactly.
So, if you like RPGs, and I know everyone loves some good action, no matter what it is, whether it's Marvel stuff, whether it's Final Fantasy, whether it's a John Wick, everyone loves them a good action story or a good action sequence. This game has plenty of that, and the one thing that I haven't seen a lot of people draw comparisons to that I like to put on, especially with a lot of the bike scenes that Tim was talking about earlier, this game has like Uncharted level cinematics and set pieces from time to time as well. So in the midst of the amazing story where you're diving into these characters' lives and backstories, and you're playing with them for 30 to 40 hours on end, mixed with the great story again of seeing Cloud, this mercenary, trying to help this Avalanche group topple the Shinra Corporation for whatever reasons that each character may have. So you have the great story. We've talked about the great combat engine at length. It weaves in, again, set pieces that are just like, oh my goodness, they did that. Again, Tomb Raider, Uncharted level set pieces, which Final Fantasy games never really, I guess it depends on what your definition of a set piece is, but the vision that I have in my head, I draw parallels with this game to, again, like an Uncharted or Tomb Raider, where not many other Final Fantasy games necessarily have a lot of stuff like that. When you think of explosions and characters thinking on the fly and reacting to different things flying in their direction, and again, you're jumping on a bike with this big Buster Sword, and you're chopping stuff up here and there. You got robots coming at you from different types of machinery coming at you from buildings and stuff like that. Like, it gets pretty crazy. And a lot of the different set pieces in this game, that again, just due to technology reasons as well, that a lot of other Final Fantasy games don't have. So I'm sure you've seen a lot of different elements of Final Fantasy spread out. Like, even for me, a thing that I didn't mention in the beginning is that another way I was exposed to Final Fantasy VII way back when I was experiencing the different types of lore that the game had, was Kingdom Hearts, my favorite game series. Cloud and Sephiroth and Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 play a role in that as well. So that was another way for me to, even though it's completely different, it's a toned Kingdom Hearts thing, but that was another way I got exposed to these characters. And it's like, man, like, these characters are everywhere. And they've been in other entertainment media. We have Cloud is a huge character in Smash Bros. So when it comes to the mainstream aspect that this game provides, again, if you've never played a Final Fantasy game, it doesn't matter. It's different enough in its story to where, and again, each Final Fantasy is traditionally its own story, to where you're just picking a story you want to play when you're looking at all these Final Fantasy games. And 7 is, again, the most mainstream, and I personally think the most accessible. And the cool thing with 7 is if you do like it, there are other parts of the story that branch out. Again, there's the Advent Children movie that takes place after the original Final Fantasy VII. There's Crisis Core, that if you have a PSP, you can play, or if you just want to watch the cutscenes on YouTube, you can do that. Same thing with Dirge of Cerberus. I think that was on the PS2, if I'm not mistaken. So if you if you play it and love the story, there's more elements outside of the base game itself that you can explore to share the same level of love we have for these characters in this story, that hardcore fans do.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that's a really good idea for a segment moving forward in these reviews is, hey, someone who hasn't played this series, this type of game before, maybe whatever, this is why you should play it. So those are, both of you make really, really compelling cases. I'm definitely going to play it at some point here, especially hearing what you guys had to say. And Rashawn, you basically had me at Uncharted and John Wick. I mean,
I knew it.
You spoke to me. You know how to get me. Do we want to dive into just the last section here for spoilers?
Yeah. Real quick, one thing I do want to add, just because I didn't bring this up earlier, in terms of my negatives for the game, because we've praised it a lot, obviously, because there's so much to praise. There's not many. There's two that are so nitpicky that they almost, one of them could potentially hinder your enjoyment of the game. One of them doesn't. In my opinion, it's just something that I pointed out, and I've seen other people point out. The small thing is, as we talk about the graphics, all the character models, everything's flawless. There are. If you look, like, for example, if Cloud and Tifa are talking, and you're in the cutscene, let's say you're in a bar, or you're outside, Cloud and Tifa look amazing. But then you look over and you look at this bush, and it just is poorly rendered. It looks weird. You look at this building. Yeah, right. The doors are missing or just, have terrible textures on it. If you look at this building, the bricks look kind of weird. So they clearly, I think it got to a point in development, again, with the long development of this game, to where if they maybe would have touched things up like that and really taken that time, something like that. Again, I'm not a game designer, but maybe that could have delayed the game another year and a half, potentially, to really fix up every little texture of things that really don't matter when you're not in that scene for like 2 seconds.
And it's possible too with that, like Rashawn said, it might have actually ended up not making the game run as smooth as it did, because maybe they had to take a piece out or a piece here or a piece out there to make it so it was capable of running on the PS4. So we would never know, you know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not a game developer, but I would assume that definitely did have something to do with it, whether it's time frame and or the way the game ran. But to me, that's not going to affect your enjoyment of the game. It's so subtle that you really have to look. And then one thing that I guess, depending on the person, could just affect your enjoyment. For me, I acknowledge it, that it's not even a problem, that it's just like okay, I wonder why they did that. Is just some of the side missions, some of them are like a lot of, I've seen a lot of complaints that some of the side missions are kind of just fetch quests, and I would agree with that. However, if you look at a lot of other RPGs out there, that's kind of, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but that's where a lot of, it seems like these RPGs, whether it's, JRPGs or regular action RPGs, are kind of going just here. Susan gives you a list of ingredients that she needs to make this thing. Go find it and bring it back to her. Side quest complete. And some of the side missions do get a little more complex than that in this game, but a lot of it is fetch quest. So it just really kind of depends on how many other RPGs you play and how many times you've have to have done a fetch quest. For me, it's kind of like, all right, here we go. Whereas if you're not as adept in RPGs, maybe you're like, man, this is kind of really monotonous and boring. So it really just depends on who you are and the type of gamer you are there. For me, I acknowledge it. It's not a huge problem for me. Would I have liked to have seen a little more work done in the side mission department? I guess so. But the lens that I use for this is that, once again, this game technically isn't done. Even though this is 100% like complete game from start to finish in its own right, the story and where they're going with this game is still not done. As we know, we still have part 2 and maybe even a part 3 or however many more parts after that, to where if you've played the original Final Fantasy VII, once you leave Midgar, the game opens up. So I'm assuming maybe that's where we're going to get the Witcher level type of side quests and open world and stuff like that. And if you've played the original Final Fantasy VII, you know kind of already that their hands are tied with what they can do when it comes to side content, only because it's in Midgard, you're in these sectors, you're in these compact spots. There's no way for them to necessarily go crazy with side missions. So that's why for me, it doesn't bother me. I see a lot of people talking about that online. When you put that lens on it and you realize what tools they have that they're working with, there is only so much that they can do. And I think for some of the linear parts that this game does have, they do a masterful job with making as many side missions and the content that they did put in the game already due to the limited restrictions that they had from the original. So for me, again, it's a small issue, not a big issue. The first issue really isn't even really an issue. It's just something that I noticed. I don't know if we do ratings here on the Geekiverse, my first game review, but if I did have to give this game a rating, for me, it would be a 9.5 out of 10.
I could agree with that. I'll get on board with that. And I agree with you on the side quest thing. The one thing that I like they added to the side quest that a lot of other games don't, just playing a lot of RPGs. I've played a lot of MMORPGs where there's a lot of fetch quests. There's a reward. So in each area, you have a list of side quests. When you complete all the side quests, there's a reward for doing that affects you more than just getting an extra, piece of materia or something like that, which I liked. I like having a sense of reward where, hey, here's this extra cutscene, extra content for completing the side quest, which I liked a lot. So
yeah.
I can kind of speak to side missions again with what you're both saying. My general feeling towards them is I don't usually care for them unless I really care for the source material. So, for example, Assassin's Creed Origins, which I've always liked Assassin's Creed, always played through just about every game in that series, it got grindy really fast because I had to start doing side missions in order to level up my character to be anywhere close to where I had to be competitive on my mainline missions. I didn't like that. I didn't like being forced to do that. And I typically don't mind a game guiding you in where it wants you to go. But on the flip side, a game Tim's about to dive into, which obviously I've been praising at every second, is Jedi Fallen Order. And that's a game where, give me as much as you possibly can and I'll go do it. I don't even care if it's like, hey, you got to go get this material for this person and there's really not a big payoff. Because I love Star Wars so much, right. I don't care. So I think that's usually where I fall on side missions and such. As long as it usually doesn't hinder your main progress or force you to get too much out of the way, I'm fine with having the option there.
And none of the side missions in this game, if I'm remembering correctly, are forced. You can skip them. None of them are forced, to my knowledge. Maybe I think one technically is just because you're at the start of the game and they're like, oh, just go do this to prove that you can do a side mission. But none of them are forced.
But there's story. So the thing, like Rashawn said, there's story to that side mission. You learn a little bit more about Tifa, and there's some content to it too, which still makes it feel like it belongs there, opposed to feeling out of place.
Good stuff, boys. So we got a 9.5 out of 10. I think that's another thing we should start doing on these video reviews. We've done written reviews for the life of the Geekiverse, but transitioning a little to video has been exciting here. So we've got probably about 5 minutes left. I'll let you guys take the ball and run with it. What do we want to talk in terms of spoilers? If you haven't played the game yet, if you're again leery of these spoilers, this is the point where we'll say farewell for now. But why don't you guys take it away on any open discussion on anything spoilery in the game, story-wise?
So the first thing I want to talk about, that hand job scene. My God. I was not expecting it. I've been waiting to talk about this. It happened, I was like... And then it was happening, and I was like, what is going on? It was awkward. I was in Discord with my buddies, and they were watching, like, what's going on? I was like, oh, man.
And I think it was kind of supposed to be, too.
So if you guys remember in Discord, I mentioned that, I started watching somebody streaming the game because I had, 5 minutes, and I needed just background stuff while I was, making lunch, for example. And I had it on... my Xbox One, and someone was streaming, and I want to say it was right around this part, because even my wife walked in and she's like, what the hell are you watching?
Yeah.
you thought you were getting some nasty stuff, Joe.
I was like, I don't know what I'm watching. I just started streaming Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Listen, here's the thing I'll say about that. Just that whole sequence, or that whole chapter in a way. That is chapter 9 of the game. That might be my favorite chapter. And the thing with that chapter for me as well, some of you guys who maybe are on your way to getting the platinum trophy, you may know this, or if you're just a completionist. If you're trying to go for the platinum trophy, you have to play chapter 9. I think I had to play it about five different times, I think. Just because there's some different, that chapter is the only chapter where you can have multiple different scenarios happen that can affect a different scenario. So exclusive side missions. So that gets pretty cool. But yeah, that is called, Joe. And for those who don't know, that entire place is called Wall Market. This place was a huge set piece of the original Final Fantasy VII in the first hours of the game. And the only thing I'll say without diving too much into it is Cloud does have to cross-dress. For those of you that do remember the cross-dress scene from the original game, and you're looking forward to that or like weary of that for this one, number one, they do it a lot better. But while doing it a lot better, it is over the top. They really, and for me it was one of the best because it's so different from anything else that you get in any other Final Fantasy. Again, making this have its own identity, which is pretty cool. Which is one of the few ways that they do that. But that entire sector is just crazy. That's the party sector. So once you get to chapter 9, you're getting to some good stuff.
Yeah, very awkward dancing in that chapter. I was not expecting it. It was like
100%. That's where I walked in. That's exactly where I turned on when the dance sequence was happening. And what's hysterical is I know what's going to happen is, when I eventually pick this up and start playing it. So a lot of times I'll play games late at night after my wife and daughter go to bed, and I play right in the bedroom. So we've got a TV mounted on the wall. It's convenient. I play with the headset. That will happen. That sequence will happen. Lauren will just wake up and be like, "What the hell are you playing?"
Yep, that's exactly what's going to happen.
It's like the idea between Wall Market they did in this game. They kind of expanded on a little bit more. It's kind of like the pleasure center, so to speak.
Gotcha.
Different ways to get pleasure. One is through the combat arena. People get to watch. There's a bunch of different facets. I love the way they did it. It was very, very well done. And other thing I want to talk about for spoilers, would probably be the last thing, is the ending.
Yes.
We won't talk about what exactly happens, but it's not really an ending because there's a second part. But the Whispers. So the Whispers kind of come to a climax, and they really. So Joe, I'll kind of explain this to you because you're obviously going to hear the spoilers. The way the Whispers work throughout the entire game is they're essentially the controllers of destiny. So the idea behind them is every time that you in the story almost seems like it's going to veer off and go away from the original, the Whispers kind of intervene to keep it on track.
The direction is brilliantly done on this, by the way, as you continue, Tim. It's so brilliantly done because it's like, what are they? But then as Tim's going to go into, their reasoning is
100% agree. And it kind of works because everyone, when you play the game, you have this idea of the remake, that it needs to be the original. And throughout the game, they're kind of controlling. These Whispers are controlling how the game plays out. They make sure certain characters don't live. They make sure that certain characters live. They make it so you can't get to a certain area that you want to get to, and they just intervene. And towards the end, it's kind of the climax where they decide, hey, you know what? We're going to try to make the story our own and create our own destiny. There's an epic boss battle where you fight Sephiroth before you are supposed to. You don't fight him in the original really at all before you leave Midgar, and he's in there a little bit. You kind of see a lot of Sephiroth at the moment you leave Midgar in the original. And you see like backstory and stuff like that. But in this one, you kind of get an idea of how big of a villain Sephiroth is, which I thought they did a great job of. And with the Whispers, they kind of come to a climax where you essentially defeat the Whispers, and you open up different, multiverse kind of thing, where you open up different plot lines. And one of the main characters in Crisis Core, they kind of show that he makes it back to Midgar, which he doesn't in the original, which is a big talking point online, that he might still be alive. And it really opens up a lot of different content and kind of makes it so they kind of take the cap off it, where it says, hey, you know what? We played by the rules in the remake. We're taking the top off. We can pretty much do what we want now. Supposedly they're still going to follow the rules and kind of go along with the original. But, I want to know your opinion, but that's what I kind of thought on the ending, what they were kind of trying to go for.
Yeah, if we're gonna go, if we're in spoiler territory, here we go, because I'm about to get into it and make it quick too. So when it comes to that whole thing, everything that Tim said is right on the money there. One detail that a lot of people, I don't know if it's missing, it's kind of tough. And once you play it for the first time, it's like, what? But as you start reading other people's theories and then you start going back and watching cutscenes and be like, oh, that happened. And if you're really connected with the original, and to the point of where Sephiroth is without a doubt my favorite. Well, he's up there, my favorite Final Fantasy villains. If he's not my favorite, he's like top two. You know, the only other one that can come close is Kefka from Final Fantasy VI. But Sephiroth is right there for me, and just because again, I've watched him and Cloud fight since I was born. I feel like in different entertainment mediums, but. Yeah, he is a serious problem, and the way that they weave him into this story, and the way one of the reasons why they were able to bring him in earlier is because, and Tim, I don't know if you know this Sephiroth is actually this, and they're getting into timelines here, the Sephiroth from the original Final Fantasy VII plotline. Yep. So he's invaded this timeline with the knowledge of everything that happens to him. So whether you take it from Crisis Core through Final Fantasy VII original through Advent Children to his eventual permanent defeat. Well, so we think. He knows everything. So imagine again, you know your fate in this world, and you're like, you know what? I'm gonna go to this other timeline and try to make things the way I really want them to. So you see how he's antagonizing Cloud and everything throughout the entire plot of Final Fantasy VII Remake. And then again, that all comes to a head, at least the first part, at the end of this game. So you have the thing with the whispers. They're like, in a way, like the analogy that I can think of is like, they're like the fans that don't want the game to change. They want it to be exactly the same. Think of those fans as the whispers, where no, this has to be a dedicated remake. It must not change. That's what the whispers are basically trying to reinforce. To where it gets to a point where the characters do have to defy destiny in order to, because they start seeing little foreshadowing of what could potentially happen to them if they continue along the original Final Fantasy VII plotline. And again, if you play the game, you know everything that ends up happening. So they want to defy destiny, and that's the whole part of that last segment of the game. So for those who get to that point, you might not really know what's going on. Thus, you come to a video like this to kind of get a little bit of an explanation, because it is kind of crazy. And the one last thing I'll say about the Sephiroth point is that is by far, that's one of my favorite boss fights of all time. And again, understand where I'm coming from. Again, one of my major exposures to Final Fantasy genre in general was Final Fantasy VII. I grew up watching Advent Children. I grew up with Crisis Core. That gives you a ton of backstory on Sephiroth and that as well. Seeing Advent Children, seeing Cloud and Sephiroth fight in that, not in like a pixelated form. So just, and again, seeing them fight in Kingdom Hearts 2, it's like, I'm a huge Batman fan, and I've grown up since I was born watching Batman and Joker fight. This is like that for me. Like that main event, like, you know, Mayweather versus Pacquiao type of, or Mayweather versus McGregor type of main event that I wanted to always see adapted into a modern game. So seeing that we got that in this game was incredible. I was screaming throughout the entire fight. And I didn't think we were going to get that in this part, which was so shocking for me, at least. I thought we were going to have to wait till part 2, part 3, thus 4, 5, 6 years to get a fight like that. But we got it in this game, and we'll see where it goes. And
they did it well. They did it enough to where you get a taste of how Sephiroth is, but you didn't get to like, there wasn't like a complete ending to it. It was like, hey, this is what's happening now. This is the real enemy of the game, and you know, that's set the plot line for the next game. So I'm excited. So hopefully I don't have to wait 5 years, but
seriously,
I think we will. Unfortunately.
Awesome, guys. Awesome discussion here on Final Fantasy VII Remake. We want to know your thoughts. The community listening or watching the video, how much did you enjoy the game? Are you like me? You haven't taken the dive yet, but you're excited to do so? Let us know in the comments below on all social media for the Geekiverse. I will wrap things up here. Tim, where can we find you on social media? And you've got a little show to plug that's coming up.
Yeah, I'm super excited for it. So you can find me on Twitter. Everything's Tim Tales, so TIMTALS. on Friday, I'll be starting the Fallen Order stream. I'm gonna actually stream it, so I built a new computer for it. It's gonna run really nice on it. I'm excited, and we're actually starting up a podcast. Myself and Joe were doing. It's called Dadcast. So, as everyone knows, I am a dad, soon to be a dad to two. So I'm actually expecting a little girl in October.
Congrats!
So I'm really excited, and I'm excited.
Yeah, congrats!
To share, thank you. I'm excited to share how the transition was when I first became a dad, and what it's like. What it's like now. I'm a business owner, so I work a lot of hours, and on top of that, I have a family. So where do you find the time to game? And there's one little key right here.
Yeah,
that's what I'll lead into. But yeah, so I'm
essential.
excited for it. Yep.
Good stuff, man. I super thrilled to get going with Tim on that. There's nothing quite like being a father, and being a gaming father is a different animal altogether. So we're going to do this monthly. We'll have a little bit of a lifestyle podcast / show that we'll just kind of almost like a group therapy, but in a positive way. We're from a positive standpoint. We're going to talk about all of that. Cannot wait to get going.
The support group.
Absolutely. It's a good way to put it. Rashawn, where can people find you on social? And you're all over the Geekiverse lately.
Yes.
Where can they see you there?
So let's start with the Geekiverse. You can find me on our Geeks Got Game podcast, where we talk about gaming news and all the relevant gaming topics at that point in time. Excited for later tonight. We're actually filming an episode of our new show, MCU Review, where we're going through each MCU movie from week to week and basically just reviewing them with the context of the Infinity Saga being over, which is incredible. And hopefully we could take that farther beyond the Infinity Saga as well. And then I'm on, different reviews like this. My first review here, which was awesome. So different, games that I've played and that the others of the Geekiverse have played, will hop on here, do some reviews. Outside of here, you can find me on Twitter, TrueKing0, and on my Twitch streams as well, TrueKing0, getting some new equipment for that stuff. And as we speak, so there'll be some quality improvements. There'll be some things that are revamped on that as well. So if you like games and want to hang out, come see me.
I think one thing we got to do, though, before we get off, you got to show us an up-close view of that Buster Sword.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah, bring it over.
It is not actually life-size, because I think that's somewhat impossible.
Oh, it's beautiful.
I got this from a Renaissance fair, actually.
Awesome.
I can't even remember where it is. It's not necessarily local. It's about a 2.5-hour drive, but yeah, there's no materia in here. I'm not that cool.
Wait, so you can't cast fire or something with that?
I cannot. Not yet. Even though I am the Platinum King, I have my weapon here, along with my, Keyblade and lightsaber that you can't really see back there. Yeah. Lightsabers wrapped up. So I have my weapons of choice, but no magic.
You never know when you'll need them, so it's good to have them handy.
Yep. I know where I'm going if something happens.
That's right. If the quarantine gets even crazier, we're going your way, Rashawn.
If you have a Keyblade, a Buster Sword, and a lightsaber, what do you need a gun for? Let's be honest.
Right. That's right. On social media, I'm Josiah D. Leroy. You can find me all over the Geekiverse, of course. One thing we did not plug is I'm actually guest starring on a Geekiverse show that I'm not regularly on. So this is going to be a blast. We're doing a quarantine version of Drafting with Drafts. So our show, which is sponsored by our partners at Community Beer Works, we are going to be doing a quarantine rendition of that, and I cannot wait to do that. That will be revealed in the coming days, and you'll be able to stream it right at youtube.com/thegeekiverse. Thanks to Tim and Rashawn for joining us today. 2 of the Geekiverse's rising stars. We've got them on one video now, which is wonderful. Been hoping to get you both together for a few weeks now. So thanks so much from the community for tuning in, whether you're on podcast form or on youtube.com, again, /the Geekiverse. We really appreciate you listening in. Lots of content coming up in the next few weeks here. The Geekiverse is celebrating its 6th anniversary, so stay tuned all month long for all of our brand new shows, as well as discounts in our merch store. And soon we will be unveiling our 6th anniversary logo and t-shirt, which will be limited edition. So again, for Rashawn and Tim, I'm Josiah. We will catch you all soon. Have a wonderful day.